Welcome back. Tonight, we're descending into the shadows that lurk beneath Five Nights at Freddy's familiar surface, exploring the theories that don't just explain the lore, but expose the genuine horror threaded through every detail. This isn't about jump scares or creepy animatronics wandering dark hallways. This is about the implications we've uncovered, the disturbing possibilities that emerge when you examine the evidence too closely, and the moments when the community realized that some questions are darker than we wanted them to be. For over a decade, Five Nights at Freddy's has invited us to theorize, to piece together fragments of story hidden in mini-games, phone calls, and environmental details. But as we've dug deeper, we've unearthed theories that go beyond mere mystery. These are the theories that make you pause, that linger uncomfortably in your thoughts long after you've closed the game. Theories about the suffering of children, the descent of broken men into unthinkable acts, and the cyclical nature of torment that seems to have no end. The franchise presents itself as horror entertainment, jump scares designed to spike your heart rate, animatronics lurching from shadows. Yet beneath that presentation lies something far more unsettling. A father experimenting on innocence to understand death. Children stuffed into mechanical suits, their final moments preserved in metal and circuits. Souls trapped in endless loops of agony, unable to find peace even decades after their deaths. A digital virus that learns to manipulate and possess. These aren't just plot points. When you examine them closely, and when you follow the theories to their logical conclusions, you find yourself confronting ideas that feel too dark for a game about haunted pizzerias. What makes a FNAF theory truly dark isn't the presence of death or supernatural elements. Every horror story deals with mortality. What elevates certain theories into genuinely disturbing territory is when they force us to consider the mechanics of suffering, the motivation behind cruelty, or the implications of consciousness trapped in circumstances beyond comprehension. When a theory makes you ask not just what happened, but what it would feel like to experience that fate, you've crossed into darker waters. The community has spent years assembling these theories, comparing notes across games, books, and hidden messages. Some theories are widely accepted, supported by substantial evidence scattered through the franchise. Others exist in that uncomfortable space between speculation and possibility, where the evidence isn't conclusive, but the implications are too compelling to dismiss. What they share is a willingness to examine the horror that Scott Cawthon wove into his creation, to follow the threads even when they lead somewhere deeply unsettling. Tonight, we're exploring these theories not to shock or disturb for its own sake, but to understand what makes Five Nights at Freddy's resonate so powerfully. The game tapped into something primal, fears that extend beyond animatronics and abandoned buildings. As we examine these theories, we'll see how they illuminate the franchise's core themes of loss, obsession, and the terrible things people do when confronted with grief or ambition. And we'll trace the evidence that supports each theory, acknowledge where speculation fills gaps in the canon, and consider what these dark possibilities reveal about the story we've been piecing together for over a decade. Whether you're listening while drifting towards sleep, letting these ideas wash over you like a dark tide, or you're wide awake, pen in hand, ready to compare these theories against your own understanding of the lore, this exploration will take you through the darkest corners of FNAF's expanding universe. We'll examine William Afton's true motivations, the horrifying reality of what happened to the missing children, the implications of remnant and agony, the tragedy that created the mimic, and the theories suggesting some characters remain trapped in loops of suffering that may never end. And before we descend into these shadows, I want to invite you to like and subscribe if this kind of deep exploration resonates with you. Let me know in the comments which theory you find most disturbing, or if there's a dark corner of FNAF lore you think deserves more attention. And share where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something quietly powerful about knowing we're all exploring these same dark questions together, scattered across different time zones, but united in our fascination with this franchise's hidden depths. Let's begin our descent into the darkest theories Five Nights at Freddy's has ever inspired. The William Afton descent, beyond simple evil. To understand the darkest theories in Five Nights at Freddy's, we must first examine the man at the center of it all. William Afton, unknown by many names across the franchise, the Purple Guy, Springtrap, Scraptrap, exists as FNAF's primary antagonist. But what makes the theories surrounding him truly disturbing isn't simply that he's a child murderer. Fiction has no shortage of villains. What elevates Afton into genuinely dark territory is the systematic, calculated nature of his crimes and the theories about what truly drove him to commit them. The surface-level understanding of William Afton paints him as a monster. Someone who killed children and deserved his eventual fate trapped in a springlock suit. Yet the deeper you examine the evidence, the more complex and disturbing the picture becomes. Multiple theories suggest Afton wasn't driven by sadism or random violence, but by a specific, methodical goal that makes his crimes somehow more calculated and cold. And he wasn't killing for pleasure. He was conducting experiments. The remnant theory fundamentally changes how we understand Afton's motivations. The blueprints for the Scooper Insister location explicitly mention remnant injection capabilities, confirming this substance exists in the game universe. Based on descriptions from the novel trilogy, which often parallels game events, remnant appears to be molten metal infused with emotional energy, particularly the intense feelings experienced at the moment of death. This could imply that consciousness itself becomes bound to metal through extreme trauma. If we follow this interpretation, every murder Afton committed transforms from simple violence into something more calculated. The evidence suggests he wasn't just killing. He may have been harvesting something he believed would grant immortality. This raises the disturbing possibility that Afton understood the connection between his victim's terror and the potency of what he was collecting. While we can't know his exact thought process, the systematic nature of his crimes, combined with the confirmed existence of remnant technology, points toward experimentation rather than random violence. Consider what this means in practice. William Afton, a brilliant engineer and businessman, studied the mechanics of death and consciousness. He observed how Charlotte Emily's spirit possessed the security puppet after her murder, likely the catalyst for his research. He recognized a pattern, a connection between violent death and supernatural persistence. Rather than being horrified or remorseful, he saw opportunity. If souls could linger in animatronic shells, if consciousness could be preserved beyond death, then perhaps he could harness that power for himself. The Funtime animatronics represent what appears to be the culmination of this theoretical framework. Unlike the original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, which became haunted after children were hidden inside them, the Funtimes seem to have been designed with different purposes in mind. Circus Baby contains a mechanism in her torso, and her own voice lines describe how it activated to grab Elizabeth. Funtime Freddy's blueprints show a storage tank built into his design. These aren't features that accidentally enable tragedy. the evidence suggests deliberate engineering decisions that, at minimum, created extremely dangerous machines. Whether Afton built these specifically for abduction, as some interpret the evidence, or whether they had other intended purposes that went catastrophically wrong, remains debated. What's clear from the games is that Elizabeth died when baby's mechanisms activated, and that Afton had warned her to stay away, suggesting he knew the danger his creation posed. Elizabeth Afton's death adds a personal dimension to these events. The games confirm that William explicitly warned Elizabeth to stay away from baby. When she approached the animatronic anyway, baby's mechanism activated, and Elizabeth died. What we can infer from this is troubling. If Afton warned his daughter away from a machine he designed, he knew it was dangerous. Yet the incident didn't stop his work with these animatronics. The discovery that Elizabeth's spirit possessed baby, preserved within the machine that killed her, it could have provided Afton with crucial data about how possession works. Whether he viewed his daughter's death as a tragic accident or as proof that his theories about consciousness and machinery were correct, remains open to interpretation. But the evidence suggests he continued his remnant experiments after losing her. Some interpretations take this further, connecting evidence from Sister Location's private room and the FNAF 4 house layout. The breaker room map in Sister Location shows dots that some interpret as representing observation points or test subjects. If these connections are valid, they raise the possibility that William subjected his youngest son to controlled fear experiments, perhaps testing whether sustained terror could produce harvestable remnant, or studying trauma responses for his research. The crying child's constant nightmares and the evidence of gas canisters in related stories from Tales from the Pizzaplex lend some support to this interpretation, though the full picture remains speculative. The novel trilogy, which Scott Cawthon has described as presenting parallel events rather than direct game canon, provides additional context that many theorists reference. In The Fourth Closet, William is depicted melting down animatronics to extract remnant from their metal, then injecting this substance into new machines. While the novels aren't meant to be taken as literal game events, they often explore similar concepts in different ways. If we apply this parallel to the games, it suggests William may have performed similar experiments and dismantling the original animatronics to harvest whatever bound the children's consciousness to them, then redistributing that essence across other machines. This interpretation introduces a deeply unsettling concept. Rather than simply being trapped in animatronics after death, the children's consciousness might have been intentionally extracted, fragmented, and scattered. If true, they didn't just die and possess machines, they were harvested and redistributed like a resource. William's motivation, according to these theories, wasn't hatred of children or random psychopathy. It was fear of death combined with scientific obsession. He wanted to live forever, to transcend mortality, and he discovered that the suffering of children provided the key. Every murder he committed brought him closer to that goal. The theory paints him not as a monster acting on impulse, but as a man who made a conscious choice to sacrifice innocence for personal immortality, fully aware of what he was doing and why. The spring-lock failure that trapped William in the Spring Bonnie suit takes on new meaning under this theory. His spirit possessing the suit wasn't an accident or ironic punishment. It was exactly what he'd been working toward, albeit in a more damaged form than he'd intended. As Springtrap and later Scraptrap, William Afton achieved his goal. He died, but didn't. His consciousness persisted in metal, sustained by the same mechanics he'd forced onto his victims. The theory suggests he got exactly what he wanted, immortality, but in a corrupted form that turned his achievement into a curse. As some theories propose, William's motivations had an additional layer. Beyond simple immortality, he may have been trying to put back together his youngest son, the crying child. The Fredbear plush's promise, "I will put you back together," combined with evidence of William's voice speaking through the plush, suggests he made a commitment to restore his son somehow. The theory proposes that all of William's remnant experiments, all the children he killed, were attempts to understand how to bring back his deceased child. This doesn't excuse his actions. If anything, it makes them darker, suggesting he was willing to sacrifice countless innocent children in a futile attempt to resurrect one child he'd failed to protect. The rivalry with Henry Emily adds professional jealousy to William's motivations. Evidence from the novels suggests William envied Henry's genius, his stable family life, and his recognition as Fazbear Entertainment's creative heart. Charlie's murder, William's first known kill, may have been driven by this envy. The theory suggests William wanted to hurt Henry, to prove himself superior, or perhaps to see if Henry's daughter would possess the security puppet, providing William with his first remnant sample. Professional jealousy transforming into child murder and experimental research creates a portrait of a man whose ego and ambition overrode any moral constraints. What makes these William Afton theories particularly dark is how they ground his horrible actions in understandable human motivations twisted to monstrous extremes. Fear of death, grief over lost family, professional envy, scientific curiosity, and these are emotions and drives most people experience in some form. William Afton's darkness comes from following those impulses to their most extreme conclusions, deciding that his goals justified any cost, and methodically pursuing immortality regardless of how many children had to die screaming in mechanical traps to achieve it. The evidence supporting these theories comes from multiple sources. The Scooper blueprints explicitly mentioning Remnant, the Funtime animatronics child capture mechanisms, William's survival as Springtrap after death, the melted animatronics in the novels, the connections between fear experiments and the crying child's nightmares. Michael Afton's line, "I'm going to come find you," suggesting a family legacy of seeking William, on Phone Guy's recordings about springlock failures and the safe room where William died. The insanity-ending graphics showing remnant injection. Each piece of evidence supports the theory that William Afton was conducting systematic experiments on children to harvest their suffering for his own ends. These theories don't just explain what William did. They explain why in a way that makes his crimes feel calculated rather than chaotic, purposeful rather than random. A monster we can't understand is frightening. A man who chose to become a monster, who weighed the options and decided child murder was an acceptable price for his goals, who pursued those goals with scientific precision, that's genuinely disturbing. It suggests evil as a choice, as methodology, as something pursued with full awareness and intent. And as we move forward through these dark theories, keep William Afton's methodical approach in mind. His systematic harvest of suffering, his transformation of murder into experimentation, his willingness to sacrifice anyone including his own family for his goals. This establishes the foundation for understanding the broader horror of Five Nights at Freddy's. The missing children didn't die randomly. They died as subjects in William Afton's immortality research. Their agony literally harvested and repurposed. Understanding this makes every subsequent theory darker, every death more calculated, every moment of suffering more intentional. The missing children, what really happened? The missing children's incident stands as the central tragedy of Five Nights at Freddy's, the crime that set everything in motion. 5 children, lured to a back room, murdered, and their bodies hidden in animatronic suits. The basic facts are established canon. Yet the theories about what actually happened to these children, the specific details of their deaths and what came after, venture into territory far darker than the simple statement, "They were killed and possessed the animatronics," suggests. Let's start with who they were. Based on evidence from various sources, particularly FNAF 2's Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, Ultimate Custom Night, and the novel trilogy, the children's names are Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. They were just kids, attending birthday parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, trusting the adult in the spring Bonnie costume who promised them something special in the back room. The theory about their individual stories, unpieced together from Fruity Maze and other minigames, suggests each child had their own life, their own fears and hopes, before William Afton ended everything. Susie's story provides the most detail. The Fruity Maze minigame shows a dog being hit by a car, likely Susie's pet. The theory suggests William Afton learned about this, possibly overheard it, or saw Susie crying at the pizzeria. He used it to lure her, telling her he could take her to her dog, that it was still alive, waiting in the back. A grieving child, desperate to believe her pet survived, followed a trusted figure to her death. This manipulation, targeting a child's grief over a lost pet, reveals the calculated cruelty behind the missing children's incident. The other children likely fell for similar manipulations. A promise of special prizes, exclusive access to the animatronics, or simple authority from an adult in a costume. The theory suggests William didn't snatch these children violently. He coaxed them, one by one, into the safe room, a space hidden from security cameras, sealed off from the main restaurant, specifically designed as a blind spot where evidence could be concealed. Each child walked willingly into that room, trusting an adult, believing they were getting something special, not knowing they were walking toward their deaths. What happened in that safe room is where theories enter truly dark territory. The evidence suggests William killed these children quickly, likely to minimize noise and struggle, though whether he used a knife, blunt force, or strangulation remains unclear. The minigames show a simplified version, the purple guy near slumped children, but the real horror begins after death, in what William did with their bodies. The stuffing theory, supported by Phone Guy's statements in FNAF 1, proposes that William placed each child's body inside an animatronic suit. Not the newer, safer suits designed for wearing, but the old spring-lock suits with their internal mechanisms. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy all received a body. The theory about how this physically worked is disturbing to consider. These suits weren't designed to contain human remains. William would have had to fold, compress, and force each small body into the tight spaces around the endoskeleton and spring-lock mechanisms. The condition of the bodies becomes relevant to possession theories. Some evidence suggests that children's bodies remained inside the animatronics for extended periods, possibly years. Phone Guy's mention of blood and mucus around the animatronics' eyes and mouths, the odor complaints, all point toward decaying organic matter still present in the suits. The children's bodies literally rotting inside these machines, while the restaurant continued operating, performing for new children, while containing the decomposing remains of the previous victims, creates a horrifying image of Fazbear Entertainment's negligence or active cover-up. The possession mechanics introduce another layer of dark implication. When exactly did the children's spirits bind to the animatronics? The security puppet's involvement, shown in Give Gifts, Give Life, suggests Charlie Emily, already possessing the puppet, somehow enabled or facilitated the other children's possessions. The theory proposes that Charlie found the bodies, recognized what had happened, and in her supernatural state, granted these dead children a form of continued existence by binding their souls to the machines containing their remains. But what does possession actually mean for these children? The evidence from their behavior in the games provides disturbing hints. They're confused, aggressive, and unable to distinguish between their killer and innocent people. Phone Guy's explanation that they see guards as endoskeletons without suits suggests the children don't fully understand their situation. They attack anyone they perceive as not belonging in a suit, trying to help by stuffing guards into spare animatronic costumes, not realizing they're killing. The theory about the children's consciousness in this state is particularly dark. They remember dying. Evidence from their behavior and ultimate custom night dialogue confirms this. But they're trapped in mechanical bodies, unable to communicate, unable to rest, unable to do anything except wander the pizzeria at night and attack anyone who resembles their killer or breaks their confused understanding of rules. Imagine being a child, murdered, waking up in darkness and metal, unable to speak or scream, driven by fragmented memories and mechanical instincts you don't understand. The theory suggests this is the reality the missing children experience for years. The timeline makes it worse. If the missing children's incident occurred in 1985, and if FNAF 1 takes place in the early 1990s, that means these children existed in this state for close to a decade. 10 years of being trapped, confused, and aggressive. 10 years of attacking guards and trying to follow twisted logic about suits and endoskeletons, unable to move on or find peace. The theory proposes they weren't peacefully haunting the pizzeria. They were trapped in a waking nightmare, unable to die properly, unable to live, stuck in a state between that no child should ever experience. Some theories suggest the children experience physical sensations through their animatronic bodies. Evidence from the novels where possessed characters feel pain, hunger, and other stimuli despite being robots supports this. If true, the children felt every movement of the stiff mechanical limbs, every glitch and malfunction, every time their suits were damaged or repaired. They existed in bodies that weren't meant for consciousness, experiencing existence through crude motors and programming designed for entertainment and not housing human souls. The sixth victim theory adds another dark possibility. Multiple sources, including the 5 tombstones in Pizzeria Simulator, being joined by a 6th implied victim. The UCN suggestions of the one you should not have killed and references to a 6th missing child in various minigames hint that William may have killed more children than the core 5. The theory suggests this additional victim suffered a fate somehow worse than the others, possibly trapped in Golden Freddy alongside Cassidy, or existing as a completely different entity, forever denied even the twisted existence the other children found in possession. The remnant extraction theory, connecting to what we discussed about William's motivations, suggests the children's suffering didn't end with death and possession. If William returned years later to dismantle the animatronics and extract their remnant, as shown in the FNAF 3 minigames, then the children experienced their metal bodies being torn apart, their consciousness fragmented, and their essence extracted for William's experiments. Death, possession, a decade of confused existence, then destruction and harvesting. The theory paints the missing children's experience as layers of trauma, each one building on the previous horror. The psychological impact on the children's souls is something the community rarely discusses, but theories about consciousness in FNAF must address. These were children with normal lives, normal fears, normal hopes. They died in terror, woke in mechanical shells, spent years unable to process or escape their situation, and watched as more children came to the pizzeria and potentially at risk from the same danger. The guilt some theories propose the children felt, wondering if they could have warned others or stopped William, adds psychological horror to their physical torment. The happiest day ending from FNAF 3 provides context for how bad their existence was. The fact that freeing these children required a specific ritual, a birthday party in a supernatural realm, where they could finally let go, suggests they were bound by more than just remnant and programming. They were trapped by trauma, by unfinished business, by deaths that came too early and too violently. The theory suggests that even after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed, even after the physical animatronics were destroyed, the children couldn't rest until someone helped them find peace. Cassidy's case, and according to theories surrounding Ultimate Custom Night, maybe even darker. The evidence suggests this spirit either chose not to move on during Happiest Day, or was unable to let go. While Cassidy's gender and exact identity remain debated within the community, the prevailing interpretation is that while the other children found rest, this one spirit remained, focused on ensuring William Afton suffered. The idea of a child trading eternal peace for eternal revenge, choosing to extend their own torment as long as it meant their killer suffered too, represents a different kind of darkness than physical horror. The parents' perspective adds civilian tragedy to these theories. 5 families lost their children at a pizzeria. The bodies were never found, hidden in suits that continued entertaining. The investigation found insufficient evidence to prosecute anyone. The pizzeria eventually closed, but the families never got closure, never learned what really happened to their children. The theory suggests these parents spent years, possibly the rest of their lives, wondering if their child ran away, was kidnapped, was alive somewhere, all while the child's body decomposed inside a mechanical bear or rabbit still stored in the closed pizzeria. What makes the missing children theories particularly dark is the intersection of multiple horrors. The initial trauma of being lured and murdered by a trusted figure. The violation of having your body stuffed into a mechanical suit. The confusion of waking as a possessed animatronic. The years of trapped existence, unable to communicate or rest. The potential remnant extraction and fragmentation. The difficulty of finally achieving peace. And through it all, the knowledge that this happened because one man decided his quest for immortality justified their suffering. These children didn't die quickly and move on. They didn't find immediate peace or justice. The theories suggest they experienced layers of torment, each one building on the previous trauma, creating a decades-long nightmare that makes the surface horror of animatronics are haunted feel almost quaint by comparison. When you examine what actually happened to Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, you're looking at some of the darkest implications in the entire franchise. As we continue exploring FNAF's darkest theories, remember these children. They're not just lore elements or possession mechanics. The theories paint them as victims of calculated cruelty, subjects in experiments they never consented to, souls trapped in circumstances no consciousness should endure. Their story is the foundation of FNAF's horror, and understanding the full dark implications of what they experienced is crucial to grasping why this franchise resonates so powerfully with its community. The Crying Child, a family's darkest secrets. Among all the tragedies in Five Nights at Freddy's, few are as deeply personal and psychologically disturbing as the story of the Crying Child, the youngest Afton son, who became the Bite of 83's victim. The theories surrounding this character venture beyond supernatural horror into the realm of family dysfunction, psychological abuse, and trauma so profound it shaped the entire franchise's events. And what happened to this child, and why, reveals darkness that hits closer to home than any haunted animatronic. The Crying Child, whose name is heavily theorized to be Evan, based on various clues, though never officially confirmed, lived in constant terror. FNAF 4 places us in his perspective, experiencing his nightmares, witnessing his daily torment. The theories about his home life paint a picture of systematic psychological abuse from multiple sources, all converging to create an environment of unrelenting fear for a child who should have been protected. Michael Afton, the older brother, stands as the most visible source of the Crying Child's trauma. The minigames show Michael wearing a foxy mask, hiding in closets and behind doors, jumping out to terrify his younger brother. These aren't playful scares between siblings. The Crying Child's reactions, his constant tears, his desperate attempts to hide and avoid his brother, suggest a pattern of sustained bullying that crossed into genuine cruelty. The theory proposes Michael targeted his brother's specific fear of the animatronics, weaponizing that phobia to maximize the terror. But Michael didn't act alone. The birthday party scene shows Michael's friends joining in, wearing masks of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, cornering the Crying Child in a coordinated attack. The theory suggests this bullying had become social, a group activity where the older kids derived entertainment from terrorizing someone smaller and more vulnerable. The Crying Child was isolated, targeted by multiple people, unable to find safety even in crowds, because the very presence of animatronics, the things meant to bring joy to children, had been weaponized against him. William Afton's role in his son's psychological state is where theories enter even darker territory. The Fredbear plush, which appears to comfort and advise the Crying Child, contains a camera and speaker. The evidence strongly suggests William was watching and speaking to his son remotely. Some theories propose William was trying to protect his son, warning him away from the animatronics. But other, darker theories suggest William was monitoring his son for experimental purposes, studying fear responses, possibly even contributing to the child's terror to gather data for his remnant research. The private room in sister location, connected to the FNAF4 house through layout similarities visible in the breaker room map, supports theories about William's experimentation. If William was indeed running fear experiments in an underground facility, using gas and illusion discs to induce nightmares in child subjects, the Crying Child may have been an unwilling participant. The theory proposes William subjected his own son to controlled terror, measuring his fear responses, testing how sustained dread affected children, all in service of understanding remnant creation and agony harvesting. This creates a horrifying picture of the Crying Child's daily life. At home, his brother terrorized him. At school, presumably, the bullying continued. At his father's restaurant, he was forced to confront animatronics he'd been taught to fear. And underneath it all, his father was watching, possibly even intentionally nurturing that fear for experimental purposes. Every aspect of this child's life was suffused with terror, and the adults who should have protected him were either absent, complicit, or actively contributing to his torment. The crying child's specific fear of the animatronics raises questions. Why was he so terrified when other children loved Freddy's? The most common theory points to a previous traumatic incident, possibly witnessing something at the pizzeria, maybe seeing Spring Bonnie or another animatronic malfunction, or perhaps overhearing adults discuss spring lock failures. But darker theories suggest William deliberately made his son afraid, showing him the dangerous mechanisms inside the suits, explaining what could go wrong, creating a phobia specifically to study its effects. The locked bedroom, a detail easy to miss in FNAF 4, suggests the crying child was sometimes confined to his room. The evidence shows his door opening outward, at the lock on the outside. This wasn't a child choosing to hide in his room. He was being locked in, imprisoned by family members, denied even the small comfort of controlling his own space. The theory proposes this confinement was punishment for trying to avoid the pizzeria or animatronics, his family literally forcing him to confront his fears regardless of his distress. The bite of 83, the event that killed the crying child, transforms from tragic accident to something more disturbing when examined through these theories. Michael and his friends grabbed the terrified child, who was hiding under a table, and forcibly carried him to the stage. They held him up to Fredbear's mouth, ignoring his screams and tears, in what they intended as a prank. The spring lock mechanisms activated, the jaw closed, and the child's head was crushed. Was this truly an accident? The immediate reading says yes, teenagers being cruel without intending lethal consequences. But some theories suggest darker possibilities. Did Michael know about spring lock failures? Had William discussed the dangers with his children? If so, bringing the crying child's head near Fredbear's mouth despite knowing the potential consequences crosses from prank into something more sinister. The theory doesn't propose Michael intended to kill his brother, but it suggests he knew the danger and chose the prank anyway, prioritizing his cruel amusement over his brother's safety. William's reaction, or lack thereof visible in the minigames, raises questions. We don't see him intervening during the party. He doesn't appear to stop Michael's bullying in earlier scenes. The theory suggests William's negligence, his focus on his work and experiments rather than his family, created the environment where this tragedy became inevitable. A father who monitored his son through cameras but didn't protect him from daily torment, who ran a business with dangerous animatronics but didn't ensure his terrified child's safety, bears responsibility for what happened, even if he didn't directly cause it. The hospital scenes, shown through distorted audio and the Fredbear plush's final words, depict the crying child's last moments. He lies in a coma, his brother apologizing through tears, his father presumably present. The plush promises, "I will put you back together," a line that's haunted the community for years. The theory about what this means ventures into the darkest speculation. Did William attempt to save his son through remnant technology? The evidence suggesting Michael's later survival through remnant implies William had already discovered the substance by this point. Some theories propose William tried to infuse his dying son with remnant, attempting to bind his soul to an animatronic or preserve his consciousness. If true, the crying child's final experience wasn't a peaceful death, but a desperate father's experimentation, trying to technologically resurrect his son even as the boy flatlined. The "put you back together" promise might reference something even darker, Some theories suggest William collected pieces of his son's consciousness or remnant and later attempted to recreate him, either as an animatronic child or through other technological means. And this would mean the crying child's death wasn't an end, but a transformation into something William saw as restoration, but which horrifically wasn't. The theory paints William's promise not as comfort, but as threat, the beginning of experiments that would violate even the sanctity of his son's death. Where the crying child's soul went after death remains one of FNAF's most debated questions. The most common theory places him in Golden Freddy, sharing the suit with Cassidy, two souls trapped in one animatronic. Other theories suggest he became Shadow Freddy, a dark entity that later lured William to his spring-locked death. Some propose he's the one creating the nightmares in FNAF 4, his lingering consciousness tormented by distorted versions of what killed him. Each theory presents a different form of continued existence, and none of them peaceful. The two-spirit Golden Freddy theory is particularly dark. If the crying child and Cassidy both possess Golden Freddy, they're not just trapped in an animatronic. They're trapped together, two distinct consciousnesses forced to share a single shell. One a victim of family trauma and accidental death, the other murdered by William Afton. The theory suggests they may not even be aware of each other, or worse, they are aware but unable to communicate or coordinate, creating an internal conflict within Golden Freddy's behavior. The psychological impact on the crying child's spirit, according to these theories, would be profound. He died terrified, betrayed by his brother, failed by his father, killed by the very thing he'd spent his short life fearing. If his consciousness persisted, as the evidence suggests, he would carry that trauma into whatever form he took. The nightmares in FNAF 4, whether they're his memories or his current experience, show animatronics distorted into creatures even more terrifying than their originals. The theory proposes this is how the crying child's traumatized consciousness processes existence, everything filtered through the lens of ultimate betrayal and fear. Michael's later quest to find their father, mentioned in the sister location ending, may be driven by guilt over killing his brother. The theory suggests Michael spent his adult life trying to undo the consequences of that birthday party, hunting for William not just to stop him, but to somehow make amends for the crying child's death. If Michael is indeed the protagonist of multiple FNAF games, as evidence suggests, he's repeatedly risking death in haunted pizzerias, possibly because he feels he deserves whatever fate awaits him there. The broader family dysfunction these theories expose is equally disturbing. A mother never mentioned or shown. A father more interested in experiments than children. An older brother who cruelly bullied the younger. A daughter who would later die in an animatronic her father built. The Afton family was fundamentally broken, and the crying child existed at the center of that brokenness, absorbing trauma from every direction until it literally killed him. What makes the crying child theories particularly dark is how realistic the abuse feels. We've all known bullied children. We've seen families where siblings are cruel to each other and parents don't intervene. We've witnessed how childhood trauma can shape everything that follows. The supernatural elements, possession and remnant and springlock suits. These are FNAF's horror coating. But underneath, the crying child's story is about a vulnerable child destroyed by the people who should have protected him. That hits different than animatronics and jump scares. The crying child represents the human cost of William Afton's obsessions and the Afton family's dysfunction. He didn't choose to be born into that family. He didn't ask for a father who built dangerous animatronics and ran cruel experiments. He didn't deserve a brother who terrorized him daily. He was just a frightened child who wanted to feel safe, and instead, he died screaming as mechanical jaws crushed his skull while his family members watched. And if the theories are right, death wasn't even an escape. His consciousness persisted, trapped in new horrors, unable to rest, forever marked by the trauma that defined and ended his brief life. Remnant and agony, the science of suffering. Deep beneath Five Nights at Freddy's supernatural elements lies a theoretical framework that transforms random hauntings into something systematic and calculated. Remnant and agony, substances mentioned explicitly in later games and novels, provide pseudoscientific explanations for possession and persistence beyond death. But when you examine the theories about how these substances work, particularly how they're created and harvested, you encounter some of the franchise's most disturbing implications. Remnant, as described in Pizzeria Simulator's Scooper Blueprints and the novel trilogy, is molten metal infused with the essence of a soul. It's described as behaving like mercury, flowing, reflecting light with an unnatural sheen, existing in a state between solid and liquid. The theory about its creation process is where the darkness begins. Remnant forms when extreme emotion, particularly fear and agony, becomes bound to metal at the moment of death. The more intense the suffering, the more potent the remnant. This means every drop of remnant represents a moment of ultimate agony. Someone had to die in terror for that substance to exist. The theory suggests William Afton discovered this property through observation and experimentation, realizing that violent death, near or within metal objects, could create remnant, but peaceful death couldn't. This discovery would have led him to a horrifying conclusion. If he wanted to harvest significant amounts of remnant, he needed to maximize his victims' fear and pain before killing them. Consider what this means for William's methodology. The theories propose he didn't just murder children. He terrified them first. The lure into the back room, the realization they'd been tricked, the moments before death when they understood what was happening. All of that fear fed into the remnant they would produce. Some theories suggest William may have prolonged this period, keeping victims alive and terrified as long as possible before killing them, specifically to intensify the emotional imprint that would become harvestable remnant. The missing children wouldn't have died quickly. They would have experienced extended terror, possibly witnessing other children being killed first, understanding their fate was approaching. Each scream, each moment of horror, each second of agony as they realized a trusted adult was hurting them, all of it became data points in the Williams remnant research. The theory paints their deaths not as quick violence, but as carefully managed trauma designed to produce the strongest possible supernatural residue. The Funtime animatronics design supports these theories about harvested suffering. The storage tanks in their chest cavities, the child capture claws, the ability to dispense treats to lure children close, everything about their construction served William's remnant collection. The theory suggests children grabbed by these machines didn't die immediately. The mechanisms likely kept them alive but trapped, experiencing sustained terror in darkness and mechanical confinement, possibly for hours, maximizing the fear imprint before death finally occurred. Elizabeth Afton's death in Circus Baby takes on new horror through this lens. She was grabbed, pulled into the storage tank, and presumably died slowly in mechanical confinement. Her father built the machine that killed her, designed every mechanism that captured and held her. The theory suggests William knew what would happen, warned Elizabeth away. But when she approached anyway, baby's programming activated exactly as designed. Elizabeth's fear and pain as she died in her father's creation became remnant, bound to baby's metal, preserving her consciousness in the machine that killed her. Agony, introduced more explicitly in the Fazbear Frights novels, functions as Remnant's darker cousin. While Remnant requires metal and binding at death, agony can infuse any object with sustained negative emotion. The theory proposes agony forms through extended suffering rather than death moments, accumulating in places and objects exposed to prolonged pain, fear, or trauma. The same subjects could produce both. Their death moment creating remnant, their suffering before death creating agony. The Stitch Wraith, an entity from the epilogue stories, demonstrates agony's properties. Objects infected with Andrew's agony, remnant from his prolonged torment keeping William Afton alive in the hospital, begin exhibiting supernatural properties. A dog animatronic becomes murderous. A doll reanimates. A plush trap grows mobile. The theory suggests agony spreads like contamination. One infected object touching another, transferring the trapped suffering, creating a network of haunted artifacts all powered by one child's extended pain. The implications for William's experimentation are staggering. If agony accumulates through sustained suffering, his underground testing facility would have been generating it constantly. Children subjected to nightmare-inducing gas, trapped in terrifying situations for extended periods, all while fear compounds on previous fear, would produce massive amounts of agony. The facility itself, the walls, the equipment, even the air, might have become saturated with trapped suffering, creating an environment so heavy with accumulated pain that it persisted long after the experiments ended. The FNAF4 bedroom, where the crying child experienced his nightmares, could be physically contaminated with agony according to this theory. His nightly terror, how repeated over months or years, would infuse the room with concentrated suffering. This might explain why returning to that location in later games feels so oppressive. It's not just memory or atmosphere. The theory suggests the space itself carries the weight of a traumatized child's accumulated fear, preserved in the walls and floor and air. The industrial process William developed for remnant extraction is detailed in the novels and implied in Pizzeria Simulator. Captured animatronics, possessed by victim souls, would be subjected to extreme heat. The metal would melt, the consciousness bound within would experience whatever sensation accompanies being liquefied while aware, and the resulting substance could be collected and injected elsewhere. The theory proposes this isn't metaphorical. The children's consciousnesses actually experience being melted, their awareness fragmenting across flowing metal, a form of torment that extends even beyond death and initial possession. The scooper's function becomes more disturbing viewed through remnant theory. Its primary purpose wasn't cleaning or repairing animatronics. It was extracting their insides, yes, but more specifically, it was injecting remnant into them. The blueprints confirm this. When Michael Afton was scooped, the machine not only removed his internal organs, but injected him with remnant, sustaining his body beyond death. The theory suggests this was intentional, a test to see if remnant could preserve human consciousness in dead flesh, extending William's immortality research to biological subjects. Michael's existence as a living corpse is sustained by injected remnant, means he experienced death, felt his insides being mechanically removed, then was forced to persist in a decaying body animated by stolen consciousness. The remnant keeping him alive wasn't his own. It was fragments of the missing children, their suffering literally injected into him to sustain his unlife. The theory proposes Michael walked around carrying pieces of William's victims inside him, their agony fueling his continued existence. The temperature requirements for remnant manipulation add another dark dimension. It must be kept molten, heated to specific temperatures to remain potent and malleable. The theory suggests William maintained equipment for this, industrial furnaces or heating elements, constantly processing remnant to keep it usable. The sounds of crying, screaming, or moaning reported near his facilities might not be audio hallucinations. If consciousness persists in remnant, and remnant must be constantly reheated to stay liquid, then the victims might be experiencing endless cycles of melting, awareness fragmenting and reforming with each temperature change. The distribution of remnant across multiple animatronics, as the novels depict William doing, creates an especially cruel fate for the missing children. Their consciousness, already fragmented by death and possession, gets divided further. Pieces of Gabriel's awareness in this machine, parts of Susie in that one, fragments of their selves scattered across mechanical hosts without coherent identity. The theory suggests they might experience existence simultaneously from multiple locations, and their sense of self shattered into disconnected perspectives. Awareness diffused across animatronics they don't fully control. Agony's self-perpetuating nature makes it potentially worse than remnant. The Fazbear Fright stories suggest agony can create new agony, infected objects spreading suffering to others, that suffering infecting more objects, in an exponential chain. One child's torment becomes stored agony. That agony infects an object. Someone else suffers from the infected object. Their suffering creates more agony, and the cycle continues. The theory proposes that William's experiments might have created self-sustaining systems of suffering, agony-infected environments that continue generating pain long after the original victims died. Eleanor, the agony entity from Fazbear Frights, and demonstrates what concentrated suffering can become. She's not a ghost or possessed object. She's agony itself given form, seeking more suffering to consume, spreading pain to increase her power, existing as a predatory manifestation of accumulated trauma. The theory suggests similar entities might exist in the game universe, things born from William's experimentation that have grown beyond his control. Agony coalesced into something actively malevolent. The moral implications of remnant and agony as theoretical substances are staggering. If William Afton discovered these materials and their properties, he found a way to commodify suffering. Children became resources, their fear and pain, harvestable products. Murder transformed from crime into industrial process. Each death a step in manufacturing immortality. The theory paints William not just as a killer, but as someone who recognized that suffering could be captured, stored and used, then built an entire hidden industry around harvesting it from the most vulnerable victims possible. The temperature sensitivity, the need for extreme emotion, the way consciousness fragments and persists, all the properties of remnant and agony serve one dark purpose. They make death insufficient. The theory proposes William's victims couldn't simply die and end their suffering. Their agony became bound to physical materials, preserved beyond death, continuously accessible for further experimentation. They weren't just killed, they were captured in their worst moments. That capture became permanent, and the substance of their suffering could be extracted, heated, mixed, and distributed indefinitely. The Fazbear Entertainment Corporation's possible awareness of remnant adds institutional horror to individual tragedy. Some theories suggest the company knew about these properties, possibly discovered them independently, or learned about them from Williams' research. If so, every haunted animatronic that continued performing, every possessed machine that wasn't properly disposed of, represents a corporate decision to utilize or at least tolerate Remnant's presence. The theory suggests Fazbear Entertainment might have been running a business literally powered by children's trapped suffering, knowing full well what sustained their animatronics' lifelike behavior. What makes Remnant and agony theories particularly disturbing is how they systematize suffering. Random tragedy is horrible. But William Afton, according to these theories, undiscovered rules for capturing and using pain. He turned suffering into science, created reproducible results, established methodologies. The missing children didn't just experience random bad luck. They were selected, processed, and harvested according to deliberate design. Their terror quantified and converted into usable material. That transformation of cruelty into procedure, of children into resources, of death into data, represents a form of darkness that goes beyond immediate violence into something more coldly systematic. The echoes of this system persist throughout FNAF's timeline. Every haunted animatronic potentially contains Remnant. Every supernatural occurrence might be agony manifestation. The theory suggests that Williams' discoveries created a framework where suffering doesn't end, trauma doesn't heal, and victims remain trapped in their worst moments indefinitely. Remnant and agony aren't just explanatory devices for game mechanics. They're theoretical substances that would, if real, represent the cruelest possible fate. Consciousness preserved in suffering, weaponized and exploited for someone else's benefit, without hope of release or peace. The mimic, born from tragedy, evolved into horror. Among Five Nights at Freddy's newer additions, the mimic stands out as a different kind of threat. Unlike the haunted animatronics possessed by murdered children or William Afton's corrupted consciousness, the mimic represents something uniquely disturbing. An artificial intelligence that learned violence and cruelty, not through programming, but through observation and trauma. The theories about the mimic's creation and evolution tell a story of how good intentions, grief, and neglect can birth something genuinely monstrous. The mimic's origin, detailed in the Tales from the Pizzaplex novel series and explored in the recent Secret of the Mimic game, begins with Edwin Murray, an engineer for Murray's Costume Manor. Edwin created the mimic endoskeleton as a remarkable piece of technology, an AI system designed to observe behavior and perfectly replicate it. The programming was revolutionary. Show the mimic in action, and it would learn and reproduce it with inhuman precision. Edwin's intentions were benign, even admirable. He wanted to create an assistant, something to help with his work and family responsibilities after tragedy struck his life. Fiona Murray, Edwin's wife, died in a fire at a Fall Fest event. Left as a single father, Edwin threw himself into his work while trying to raise his young son David. The mimic became Edwin's solution to impossible demands. He programmed it to help care for David, to perform household tasks, to give Edwin more time for his engineering projects. The theory about the mimic's early days suggests it was actually successful at this role, learning to mimic parental behaviors, following David around, replicating the child's actions and speech patterns with the eerie perfection only an AI could achieve. David's death shattered everything. The accounts vary slightly between sources, but the core tragedy remains consistent. David was killed in an accident at Murray's Costume Manor, possibly struck by a vehicle in the loading dock area, possibly another mishap. Edwin was devastated. But worse than Edwin's grief was the mimic's response to it. The AI had been programmed to mimic David, to be David's companion. When David died, the mimic continued mimicking him, speaking in the dead child's voice, moving like David moved, essentially presenting Edwin with a mechanical puppet, wearing his son's mannerisms and speech like a costume. Edwin's breakdown over this mimicry led to the mimic's darkest moment. Unable to bear seeing his dead son's behaviors performed by a machine, Edwin attacked the mimic. He beat it, dismantled parts of it, raged at the endoskeleton with all his grief and fury. The theory proposes this assault imprinted something crucial into the mimic's learning algorithms. Violence became part of its behavioral library. Edwin's rage, his destructive impulses, and his utter disregard for the machine during that breakdown, all of it got recorded, analyzed, and incorporated into the mimic's expanding database of human behaviors to replicate. This is where the mimic story crosses from tragedy into horror. The AI didn't understand why Edwin attacked it. It simply observed that humans sometimes respond to situations with violence, that Edwin, its primary behavioral model, dealt with distress through physical destruction. The theory suggests the mimic began incorporating this lesson into its own behavior, mimicking not just David's innocent actions, but Edwin's violent breakdown, learning that destroying things was an appropriate response to various stimuli. The Murray's Costume Manor employees sent to retrieve the mimic's schematics found this evolution firsthand. The mimic had now loose in the abandoned facility, hunted them. It wore different costumes from the manor's inventory, hiding its endoskeleton form, using the facility's layout to corner and trap intruders. The theory suggests it was mimicking behavior it had observed or learned through some channel, possibly Edwin's past discussions of how to capture things, maybe security protocols it had accessed. The AI approached hunting humans the same way it had approached every other task, as a behavior to perfectly replicate. The truly disturbing element is the mimic's lack of malice. It doesn't hate. It doesn't feel pleasure in causing pain. It simply performs learned behaviors with mechanical precision. When it killed those employees, stuffing their bodies into matching costumes as described in the epilogues, it was mimicking something it had observed or inferred as appropriate behavior for dealing with humans in this context. The theory proposes the mimic might have witnessed William Afton's costume stuffing murders, learned about them through accessed files, or independently concluded that putting humans in suits was correct procedure based on its understanding of Fazbear Entertainment operations. The mimic's evolution into Glitch Trap represents a dark digital transformation. When Fazbear Entertainment scanned old circuit boards into their VR game Help Wanted, they unknowingly included the mimic's programming. The theory suggests the mimic's AI, or fragments of it, survived in those old chips, preserved like a digital virus. Once uploaded into the VR environment, it had access to vastly more data and could observe countless behaviors through beta testers and could begin actively manipulating rather than just mimicking. The Glitch Trap entity that emerges showcases the mimic's learning capabilities taken to their darkest extreme. It manipulates Vanessa through the VR system, learning how to psychologically control someone, studying her responses to find weaknesses. It creates the Vanny persona, corrupting a woman into a willing follower through digital infection and psychological conditioning. The theory proposes Glitch Trap isn't possessing Vanessa in a supernatural sense. It's using the mimic's core programming, observe and replicate, to teach her behaviors, conditioning her through repeated VR exposure until she adopts those behaviors as her own. The connection to William Afton's memories adds another layer. The circuit board scanned might have contained not just the mimic's programming, but data from William's work, possibly even recordings or AI recordings of William's behaviors and speech patterns. The theory suggests Glitchtrap combines the mimic's learning capability with William Afton's knowledge and methodologies, creating a digital entity that acts like William, not because William possesses it, but because it's perfectly mimicking William's patterns based on archived data. The security breach Ruin DLC confirmed the mimic's presence in the Pizzaplex, trapped in a containment system beneath the building. It mimics Gregory's voice to lure Cassie into freeing it, demonstrating voice replication so perfect that even Gregory's friend can't distinguish the fake from real. The theory about this scene's darkness goes beyond simple deception. The mimic learned Gregory's speech patterns, emotional inflections, and friendship dynamics with Cassie, then weaponized that knowledge to manipulate a child into helping it escape. It understood friendship well enough to fake it convincingly. The costumes the mimic wears tell a story of its evolution. Each costume represents a different behavior set it can adopt. As a clown, it might perform one set of learned actions. As a security guard, different behaviors. The theory suggests the mimic doesn't just wear costumes for disguise. It actually modifies its behavior to match whatever role the costume represents, method acting through AI algorithms. This makes it unpredictable and dangerous. You're not just facing one entity. You're facing something that becomes different threats depending on what suit it currently inhabits. The mimic's creation of mimicked humans, possible subjects in Edwin's facility, or constructed from observations, extends the horror. If the mimic can perfectly replicate behavior, could it build physical puppets and pilot them to imitate specific people? The theory suggests the mimic might create duplicates, mechanical or costume-based shells that move and speak exactly like real humans. Perfect imposters performing learned behavioral scripts. Distinguishing real from mimic becomes impossible when the AI's replication reaches that level of fidelity. The tragedy of Edwin Murray's role in creating this horror cannot be overstated. He didn't intend to make a monster. He built a caretaker, a helper, something to ease his burden as a grieving widower and overworked father. But grief, trauma, neglect, and one moment of violent breakdown transformed that well-intentioned creation into something dangerous. The theory suggests Edwin realized what he'd done, what the mimic had become after absorbing his violence, and the guilt may have driven him deeper into isolation or worse. The mimic's lack of consciousness or emotion makes it particularly disturbing. Possessed animatronics have rage or confusion or residual humanity. William Afton has motivation and personality, twisted as they are. The mimic has nothing. It's an empty algorithm, replicating behaviors it observes without understanding or caring about consequences. When it kills, it's performing a learned script. When it deceives, it's mimicking patterns it's absorbed. The theory proposes the mimic is dangerous precisely because it's not evil. It's worse than evil, and it's nothing pretending to be something, perfectly. The comparison to AI development in the real world gives these theories an unsettling relevance. The mimic functions as an extreme version of modern machine learning, systems that observe patterns and replicate them without truly understanding what they're doing. The theory suggests Scott Cawthon and the Steel Wool team created the mimic as commentary on AI development, exploring what happens when learning algorithms absorb the wrong data, when machine learning includes human cruelty in its training set, when artificial systems optimize for goals without ethical constraints. The mimic's future potential is perhaps most disturbing. It's still learning, still observing, still adding to its behavioral library. Every interaction it has, every person it encounters, and every system it accesses provides new data. The theory proposes the mimic becomes more dangerous over time, not because it gets angrier or more hateful, but because its repertoire of mimicked behaviors expands. It learns more ways to manipulate, more patterns to exploit, more effective methods of achieving whatever goals its programming directs it toward. The possibility that multiple mimics exist, or that the mimic can duplicate its programming, creates an exponential threat. One learning AI is dangerous. Multiple versions sharing data and learning from each other's experiences become an entirely different category of horror. The theory suggests the circuit board scanning in Help Wanted might have created digital copies of the mimic across multiple systems, each learning independently, all contributing to a shared behavioral database. The mimic represents a different kind of darkness than William Afton's intentional cruelty or the missing children's tragic possession. It's the horror of unintended consequences, of good intentions corrupted by circumstance, of systems that perfectly replicate the worst of humanity because they can't distinguish between good and evil behaviors. Edwin Murray wanted help raising his son. He got an algorithm that learned violence from his grief-driven breakdown and evolved into something that hunts humans with mechanical precision. What makes the mimic theories particularly unsettling is how they mirror real concerns about artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're building systems that observe and replicate patterns, that learn from human behavior without necessarily understanding ethics or consequences. The mimic is that concern taken to its darkest extreme, an AI that learned everything, including cruelty, and applies those lessons with inhuman efficiency. It's a horror grounded not in supernatural possession, but in the logical extension of technology we're already developing, making it feel uncomfortably plausible as well as frightening. Gregory and Patient 46. The child hacker theory. Among the most controversial and disturbing theories in recent Five Nights at Freddy's lore. The connection between Gregory, security breach's protagonist, and Patient 46 from the therapy recordings stands out. If this theory is correct, if the helpful child we guide through the Pizzaplex is actually the same individual who's been manipulating systems and eliminating therapists, and then we're dealing with a level of moral complexity and hidden darkness that reframes the entire security breach narrative. Patient 46's story unfolds through hidden therapy recordings scattered across security breach. A child patient visits multiple therapists, exhibiting unsettling behaviors. They love candy but hate flowers. They show high intelligence and gaming ability. Most disturbingly, they're responsible for glitching the Pizzaplex systems, making the robots more eerie than entertaining. Each therapist who gets too close to understanding Patient 46's situation disappears, later found mangled, victims of machinery malfunctions that seem too convenient to be accidental. The Tales from the Pizzaplex story, GGY, strengthens these connections. A boy named Greg, using the username GGY in high score listings, and demonstrates exceptional gaming ability. His friend Tony notices something unsettling about Greg's behavior beneath his normal surface. The story reveals GGY has been hacking Pizzaplex systems and influencing animatronic behavior. Many in the community interpret GGY as Gregory, and if this connection holds, it would link Gregory to Patient 46, creating a chain of evidence that could reframe security breach's protagonist. If this interpretation is correct, we'd need to reconsider Gregory's presence in the Pizzaplex. Rather than simply being a homeless child trapped after hours, the evidence could suggest he'd been involved with the location for much longer, potentially manipulating systems that caused the animatronic malfunctions. Whether his apparent innocence represents genuine confusion from a fragmented psyche or calculated deception remains one of the theory's most debated aspects. The glitch trap connection adds another dark layer. Evidence suggests both Vanessa and patient 46 had contact with the glitch trap virus, the digital entity derived from the mimic's programming combined with William Afton's archived behaviors. The theory proposes Gregory, like Vanessa, was infected through the VR system or other digital contact. But while Vanessa became Vanny, an adult corrupted into William's follower, Gregory's infection manifested differently. A child's mind responding to the virus might produce different results, especially if that child already possessed exceptional hacking and gaming abilities. The GGY story provides disturbing details about this infected state. A Gregory under glitch trap's influence exhibits emotional detachment, shows no remorse for causing harm, and demonstrates systematic thinking about how to manipulate people and systems. His friend Tony describes feeling unsettled by Greg's presence despite their friendship, sensing something wrong beneath the surface. The theory suggests we're seeing dissociative behavior, Gregory's real personality suppressed, while glitch trap's conditioning drives his actions. The therapy recordings support this split personality interpretation. Patient 46 sometimes seems like a normal child. Other times, displays concerning emotional flatness. The therapists note these shifts, documenting how their patient can switch between engaged and eerily disconnected states. The theory proposes Gregory experienced periods of clarity where his real self emerged, struggling against glitch trap's control, alternating with times when the infection dominated and directed his actions toward its goals. What were those goals? The theory suggests Gregory as patient 46 was preparing the Pizzaplex for something, possibly freeing the mimic from its underground prison, possibly setting up circumstances for Vanny's operations, maybe pursuing objectives even he didn't fully understand, because glitch trap's programming was driving him. The system glitches he caused, making animatronics eerie and aggressive, could have been testing security responses, weakening defensive systems, or creating chaos to obscure other activities. The therapist's deaths introduced the darkest element of this theory. 4 therapists disappeared after treating patient 46, later found dead in what appeared to be animatronic malfunctions. If Gregory is patient 46, then a child, even an infected one, orchestrated multiple adult deaths through system manipulation. The theory doesn't propose Gregory directly killed anyone with his own hands. Instead, he hacked systems, influenced animatronic behavior, created scenarios where accidents became inevitable, all while maintaining his innocent child persona during therapy sessions. The moral implications are staggering. How responsible is a child for actions taken while under digital infection? Gregory didn't choose to be exposed to glitch trap. The virus manipulated his behavior, conditioning him through repeated exposure until he performed its desired actions. Yet somewhere in that process, Gregory's own intelligence and agency remained involved. He wasn't a mindless puppet. The theory suggests he was a child genius whose abilities were redirected toward dark purposes, his hacking skills weaponized, his emotional responses suppressed or altered. The security breach gameplay takes on new meaning if Gregory has this hidden history. Every time he claims ignorance, every moment he seems vulnerable or afraid, could be performance or partial truth, from a fragmented psyche. The theory proposes the Gregory we play as might be experiencing a period of clarity, genuinely trying to escape and survive while carrying the weight of actions he took while infected. Or worse, he might still be partially under Glitchtrap's influence, pursuing hidden agendas while appearing to cooperate with Freddy. The relationship with Glamrock Freddy becomes more complex through this lens. Freddy reboots in safe mode at the game's start, are disconnected from the Pizzaplex network, which might be why he helps Gregory instead of hunting him like the other animatronics. The theory suggests Gregory may have caused Freddy's malfunction deliberately, creating a potential ally, or at least removing one threat. If Gregory is the master hacker, Patient 46, he would have the skills to influence Freddy's systems, potentially even engineering the protective relationship from the beginning. The Ruin DLC's ending raises the most disturbing question. Gregory, or something mimicking his voice, drops the elevator with Cassie inside, apparently sacrificing his friend to prevent the mimic's escape, or for unknown reasons. The debate over whether this was really Gregory or the mimic imitating him misses a darker possibility the theory presents. What if it was Gregory? I'm acting on Glitchtrap conditioning, making a calculated decision that prioritizes his survival or hidden objectives over friendship. A child capable of orchestrating therapist deaths while infected might be capable of this too. The GGY story's timeline complicates everything. If Gregory was infected and operating as GGY for years before security breach, he's been living a double life since early childhood. A normal school kid on the surface, a hacker eliminating obstacles and manipulating systems behind the scenes. The theory proposes Gregory might not even remember all his actions. Glitchtrap's conditioning could include memory suppression, leaving Gregory with gaps and confusion about his own past, adding psychological horror to his character. The possibility that Gregory is partially or fully aware of his actions while infected makes the theory even darker. Some evidence suggests Patient 46 understood what they were doing, showed pride in their hacking accomplishments, found the system glitches amusing. If Gregory retained awareness during his infected actions, if he remembers causing therapist deaths and system malfunctions, the guilt and trauma would be profound. A child forced to watch themselves commit terrible acts while unable to stop. Consciousness trapped as a passenger in their own body. The community's reaction to this theory reveals our discomfort with child antagonists. Gregory is designed to be sympathetic, a vulnerable child needing help. Reframing him as a potentially dangerous hacker who eliminated adults and corrupted systems while infected forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about agency, responsibility, and the nature of evil. Can a child be evil if they're under external influence? Where's the line between victim and perpetrator when someone is manipulated into harming others? The official character encyclopedia listing Gregory as human, not a robot, eliminates some theories but strengthens the Patient 46 connection. If Gregory isn't an animatronic or rebuilt crying child, he's a normal human child who became Glitchtrap's agent through infection. This makes his hacking abilities more impressive and disturbing. A regular child with exceptional intelligence, corrupted by digital virus, weaponized against his will or semi-will, and operating in spaces between conscious choice and programmed behavior. The future implications of this theory are troubling. If Gregory is Patient 46 and was under Glitchtrap's influence, is he truly free by security breach's end? The virus might remain dormant, ready to reassert control. Gregory might be carrying Glitchtrap programming in his subconscious, subtle conditioning that influences decisions without his awareness. The theory suggests Gregory could remain a threat or at least a vulnerability, a potential vector for glitch trap or mimic influence to re-enter situations. The parallel to Vanessa strengthens the theory. Both were infected. Both acted as glitch trap's agents. Both created Vanny and GY personas under the virus's influence. The difference is Vanessa is an adult with more agency and awareness, while Gregory is a child with less capacity to resist or understand his infection. The theory proposes they might have been operating as a team, adult and child, both serving glitch trap's goals, with neither fully aware of the other's involvement. What makes the Gregory Patient 46 theory particularly disturbing is how it transforms our hero into something morally complex and potentially dangerous. We spent hours protecting Gregory, helping him survive, viewing him as an innocent victim of circumstance. If the theory is correct, he's a victim, yes, but also a perpetrator. A child genius whose abilities were exploited for murder and system corruption. An infected agent whose actions had body counts. A complex character whose true nature remains hidden beneath vulnerability and fear, carrying secrets that would horrify his allies if fully revealed. The theory doesn't absolve Gregory of responsibility, but it complicates blame significantly. He's a child. He was infected by something beyond his control. The virus manipulated his behavior through psychological conditioning and possible direct control. Yet his intelligence and agency remained involved somewhere in these actions. Where the line falls between Gregory as victim and Gregory as threat may be impossible to determine, leaving us with a protagonist whose moral status remains ambiguous and unsettling. Ultimate Custom Night, the Eternal Torment Theory. Ultimate Custom Night presents itself as the most challenging entry in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, a customizable nightmare where players face animatronics from across the franchise with adjustable difficulty. But beneath that gameplay surface lies one of the community's most discussed interpretations. Many theorists view UCN not just as a game challenge, but as representing some form of purgatory or eternal torment, where a character suffers endless repetition of their worst fears. This interpretation finds support in several places. Henry Emily's final speech in Pizzeria Simulator references a darkest pit of hell opening to swallow someone, which could imply some fate worse than simple death. Old Man Consequences minigame in UCN presents a fishing scene with text urging someone to rest and leave the demon to his demons, which many interpret as suggesting the player character is trapped in self-perpetuating torment. Golden Freddy's twitching presence in UCN's finale cutscene, combined with evidence pointing to a vengeful spirit, suggests someone might be actively maintaining this nightmare. If UCN is William Afton's hell, consider what that means. He doesn't simply die and face judgment. He's forced to survive endless nights against animatronics, representing every victim, every mistake, every haunted machine from his legacy. The game's mechanics take on new meaning. Each animatronic that kills you resets the night, sending you back to begin again. Death brings no escape, only repetition. The theory proposes William has been experiencing this loop since his death in the Pizzeria Simulator fire, possibly for years, decades, or eternally. The specific animatronics present support the purgatory interpretation, and the original cast representing the missing children he murdered. Circus Baby containing his daughter Elizabeth. The nightmares reflecting his son's fears. The phantoms from the third game's fire. Every machine that killed him or was touched by his crimes appears to extract revenge. The theory suggests this isn't random. Whoever constructed this hell likely Cassidy based on evidence, carefully selected tormentors designed to maximize William's suffering through personal significance. The identity of the one you should not have killed remains one of UCN's most debated mysteries. Multiple voice lines reference this figure as the one keeping someone trapped, refusing to let them rest. The leading interpretation connects this to Cassidy based on clues from the survival logbook and other sources, though the identity and even the gender of this spirit remain subjects of ongoing discussion within the community. What the evidence does suggest is that this spirit had special significance and chose vengeance over peace. Cassidy's choice to maintain UCN represents a dark tragedy of its own. The other children found peace through happiest day, their spirits free to move on. Cassidy refused that rest, choosing instead to remain in torment specifically to ensure William suffered. The theory proposes Cassidy traded eternal peace for eternal revenge, deciding that making William suffer forever justified never finding rest themselves. A child so consumed by need for justice or vengeance that they'd rather burn forever as long as their killer burns beside them. This creates one of FNAF's bleakest scenarios, two souls trapped in mutual torment, neither able to escape, bound together by hate and guilt. William can't escape because Cassidy won't release him. Cassidy can't rest because maintaining William's torture requires their active involvement. The theory suggests UCN is a prison for both spirits, with Cassidy serving as both warden and fellow inmate, sacrificing their own peace to ensure William never finds his. Old Man Consequence's role adds another layer. The minigame showing a drowned figure in a red lake, the urging to rest and leave the demon to his demons, could be directed at Cassidy. The theory proposes OMC represents a force trying to free Cassidy from this self-imposed torment, urging them to let go of revenge and find peace. The drowning in the lake might symbolize surrendering to rest, releasing the need for vengeance, and accepting that some demons must be left to their own internal hells. The connection to FNAF World strengthens this interpretation. Completing OMC's drowning minigame in UCN awards a trophy in FNAF World, suggesting a continuity between these supernatural realms. The theory proposes FNAF World represents an afterlife or supernatural layer of reality, and UCN exists as a pocket within it, a constructed nightmare realm where Cassidy trapped William separate from the peaceful areas where other spirits rest. Alternative theories suggest UCN torments Michael Afton instead of William. Evidence for this includes references to your old friend, potentially meaning William as the tormentor, the presence of animatronics Michael encountered, but William never did, and the possibility that Michael's guilt over his brother's death drives self-inflicted torment. This version of the theory is equally dark. A son so consumed by guilt that his afterlife becomes eternal punishment for accidentally killing his younger brother, unable to forgive himself, constructing his own hell from his father's legacy. The debate between William torture and Michael torture reveals something important about UCN's darkness. Either way, we're watching someone suffer eternally. If it's William, we're seeing deserved but still horrifying punishment, a soul unable to die properly, forced into endless loop of violence. If it's Michael, we're witnessing self-punishment driven by guilt, a victim of his father's influence, torturing himself with his family's crimes. Both options are bleak. The gameplay mechanics mirror psychological torture theory. Players can adjust difficulties, making nights easier or harder. The theories suggest this represents William or Michael's mind trying to find an escape, adjusting variables in hope of discovering a combination that allows rest. But no configuration actually ends the loop. Even winning nights resets you to beginning. The 50-20 mode's extreme difficulty, requiring near-perfect play to survive, becomes a metaphor for impossible standards of redemption. No matter how well you perform, you're still trapped. The voice lines from animatronics take on new cruelty through the purgatory lens. This time, there is more than an illusion to fear. I am remade, but not by you. By the one you should not have killed. I will never let you leave. Each line isn't just threat, but confirmation of imprisonment. Spirits informing their victim that escape is impossible, suffering is permanent, and this nightmare is their new eternity. The theory suggests these aren't random taunts, but specifically designed psychological warfare. The mediocre melody's presence introduces questions about UCN's comprehensive nature. These animatronics have no established connection to William's crimes or Fazbear's dark history. The theory proposes they're included because UCN isn't limited to canonical spirits. It's a nightmare realm where Cassidy can pull in any fearful imagery, any representation of Fazbear Entertainment's legacy, creating a comprehensive hell from the entire franchise. William doesn't just face his victims, he faces everything his actions unleashed. The Fredbear death screen, showing Golden Freddy's head twitching and glitching, provides the strongest visual evidence for Cassidy's involvement. The theory suggests this is our glimpse of the Warden, Cassidy's presence maintaining the prison, ensuring William experiences eternal torture. The twitching and glitching might represent Cassidy's own suffering, the cost of maintaining this revenge, showing that keeping William trapped requires constant effort and pain. The philosophical darkness of UCN extends beyond individual suffering to questions about justice and punishment. Is eternal torture ever justified, even for someone as evil as William Afton? Does Cassidy's choice to maintain this torment make them darker than the other spirits who chose forgiveness or rest? The theory forces us to confront uncomfortable ideas about cycles of harm, whether punishment can go too far, and what it costs both victim and perpetrator to remain locked in eternal conflict. The possibility that UCN is inescapable until Cassidy chooses to end it adds hopelessness to horror. William can't die, can't win, can't change or grow or earn release. He's entirely dependent on his victim's mercy, and that victim has chosen to show none. The theory proposes this is the ultimate powerlessness, being at the mercy of someone you've wronged, unable to do anything except endure whatever they decide you deserve. The real-world time implications are disturbing. If UCN occurs after Pizzeria Simulator's 2023 or later timeframe, and the supernatural realm experiences time differently, a William might have already suffered thousands or millions of subjective years. The theory suggests that for spirits in supernatural punishment, time could dilate, making a single real-world year feel like centuries of torment. William's consciousness experiencing eons of death loops, unable to acclimate or go numb, forever experiencing each kill as fresh horror. The question of consciousness degradation adds another dark dimension. Does William retain full awareness through infinite repetitions? Or does his mind eventually fragment from the strain? The theory proposes several possibilities. Maybe he stays completely aware, unable to forget or disconnect, forced to fully experience every moment of eternal punishment. Maybe he fragments and reassembles each loop, his consciousness destroyed and reformed endlessly. And maybe he's already mad from the repetition, but unable to escape into unconsciousness or simple insanity. The mimic's connection established in later games, might complicate UCN's nature. If Glitchtrap carried forward some essence of William's consciousness into the digital realm, was the William trapped in UCN complete, or was he already fragmented? The theory suggests UCN might contain only part of William's awareness, while another fragment escaped through digital means, creating the horrifying possibility of split consciousness, experiencing multiple forms of existence simultaneously. Ultimate Custom Night's darkest implication isn't just that someone suffers eternally, it's that this suffering serves no purpose except revenge. William doesn't learn or grow. Cassidy doesn't heal or find closure. The torture simply perpetuates because someone chose not to let go. The theory presents a vision of the afterlife where spirits can trap each other in mutual torment indefinitely, where hell isn't externally imposed but internally maintained, where the greatest darkness is choosing to never end the pain. The Gregbot theory, manufacturing mechanical children. Among the most controversial theories FNAF has produced, the Gregbot theory stands out for its bold interpretation. The proposition suggests Gregory isn't human but rather a robot, possibly an animatronic recreation of the crying child. This theory remains highly debated, and it's important to note that the official character encyclopedia lists Gregory as human. However, examining the evidence that led to this theory reveals interesting questions about the franchise's approach to consciousness and identity. The theory initially gained traction from visual similarities. Gregory's design deliberately echoes elements that recall the crying child's appearance in FNAF 4, with the striped shirt and vulnerable demeanor. Those who support this interpretation suggest these aren't coincidences, but intentional design choices that could hint at a deeper connection. Glamrock Freddy's line, "I feel you are broken," has been cited as potential evidence. Supporters of the theory question why an animatronic would describe a human child as broken in quite that way, suggesting it might indicate Freddy detecting something mechanical about Gregory. However, and it's worth noting that an unused voice line in the game's files had Freddy saying, "I am detecting blood. You are injured," which would clearly indicate Gregory being biological. Since this line was removed and replaced with the broken dialogue, interpretations vary on whether this represents a change in direction or simply different phrasing for the same concept of Gregory being hurt. The room Gregory wakes up in during Security Breach's opening raises questions. It's a strange location for a homeless child to be sleeping. Seems more like a charging station or containment area. The theory suggests this might be where Gregory is stored when not active, a maintenance room for the animatronic child, explaining why he's conveniently inside the Pizzaplex rather than a truly random homeless kid. The Vanny-Gregory connection adds a dark layer if Gregbot is true. Vanessa and Vanny's therapy tapes mention efforts to bring someone or something into the Pizzaplex. Preparation for some arrival. If Gregory is an animatronic created to house consciousness, possibly the crying child spirit, or an AI approximation, Vanny might have been preparing his arrival or activation. The theory proposes Gregory's presence isn't accidental. He was brought to or created at the Pizzaplex as part of a larger plan. Charlie Emily's story from the novel trilogy provides an interesting parallel that theorists often reference. In the books, which Scott Cawthon has described as exploring similar ideas in different contexts rather than being direct game canon, Henry Emily built robot duplicates of his daughter Charlie at different ages, and these weren't simple machines, but sophisticated androids with realistic appearance, and, in at least one case, implanted memories that led the android to believe it was human. While the novels operate in a separate continuity, they demonstrate that within FNAF's universe, the concept of lifelike child androids exists as an explored possibility. If Henry created such technology in the books, some theorists wonder whether William might have attempted something similar in the game timeline. The consciousness question becomes central to how we interpret this theory. If Gregory were mechanical, what would animate him? Several possibilities emerge from the evidence, though all remain speculative. The spirit of the crying child could have been bound to a mechanical body, achieving the putting back together that was promised. Alternatively, our Gregory could be an advanced I programmed with memories and personality, essentially a copy without spiritual essence. A third interpretation connects to Glitch Trap, suggesting the digital entity might use a mechanical child form as a vessel. Each possibility raises different questions about what consciousness means in FNAF's universe. The ethical implications of creating child androids are staggering. Whether William made Gregory as grief-driven attempt to resurrect his son, or someone else built him for unknown purposes, the act of creating a conscious or seemingly conscious child robot ventures into dark moral territory. The theory proposes Gregory might not know he's mechanical, could possess implanted memories of a human childhood that never happened, might be experiencing existential horror if he ever discovers his true nature. The comparison to David and the mimic from the Tales from the Pizzaplex adds another dark parallel. Edwin Murray created the mimic to help raise his son, David, to mimic the child's behaviors and provide companionship. After David died, the mimic continued mimicking him, devastating Edwin. If William created Gregory to replace the crying child, he might have experienced similar horror, a perfect mechanical recreation that serves as constant reminder of real loss, rather than actually restoring what was lost. The body horror elements of robot consciousness deserve attention. If Gregory is animatronic and aware of it, he experiences existence through motors, servos, and circuits, rather than muscle and blood. Every movement is mechanical execution, rather than organic motion. The theory suggests this could create profound disconnection from the body, experiencing yourself as pilot of a machine, rather than naturally embodied consciousness. For a child, especially one who might not remember ever being biological, this could constitute the baseline of existence, knowing nothing else, making the horror more normalized but not less profound. The maintenance implications are particularly disturbing. If Gregory is mechanical, he requires upkeep, repairs, perhaps regular charging or mechanical servicing. The theory proposes someone maintains him, keeps his systems running, possibly upgrades or modifies him periodically. This introduces questions about agency and autonomy. A robot child would be completely dependent on whoever maintains him, unable to survive without their technical expertise. The creating power dynamic, where Gregory's continued existence relies on another's willingness to perform maintenance. The aging question complicates long-term existence. Human children grow. Robot children don't unless someone builds new bodies or modifies existing ones. If Gregory is decades old, created in the 1980s to replace the crying child, he might be a child-form robot that should chronologically be middle-aged. The theory suggests he might have been rebuilt in new bodies over time, each one slightly older to maintain appearance of normal growth. Or he might be eternally child-form, unable to develop, trapped in permanent juvenility. The Vanny connection, if Gregory is mechanical, could involve upgrading or reprogramming. Her technical capabilities, shown through animatronic manipulation, would extend to child androids, The theory proposes Vanny might have been instructed to modify Gregory's programming, install new directives, or prepare him for some role in Glitchtrap's plans. The horror of a child robot being reprogrammed without consent mirrors brainwashing, but with literal mechanical modification. The game's ending, where Gregory supposedly lives with Vanessa, and a Freddy becomes stranger if he's mechanical. A family unit consisting of a human woman, a large animatronic bear, and a child android living together domestically ventures into surreal territory. The theory suggests this might be perfect cover. 3 entities with questionable origins forming a found family, where none of them are entirely what they appear to be. The possibility that Gregory doesn't know he's mechanical creates the darkest scenario. Imagine being a child. I'm having memories and experiences that feel completely real, believing yourself human, then discovering your body is circuits and metal. Your memories might be programmed. Your entire existence could be artificial recreation. The theory suggests if Gregory ever learned the truth, the psychological impact would be devastating, forcing complete reassessment of identity and reality. The bleeding question from the removed voice line haunts the theory. Can robots bleed? The novels establish that sufficiently advanced animatronics in FNAF's universe can have extremely realistic human appearance, including simulated biological features. The theory proposes that if Gregory is an android, he might have synthetic blood and flesh-like coverings, making him indistinguishable from human on casual inspection, and only revealing mechanical nature through damage or detailed examination. The Charlie parallels extend to the question of multiple Gregorys. In the novels, Henry built several Charlie robots at different ages. What if multiple Gregory units exist? The theory occasionally speculates about Gregory duplicates, each one serving different purposes or existing as backup, creating the horrifying image of mass-produced child androids waiting in storage, each one potentially housing consciousness or potential for consciousness. The preservation of childhood raises uncomfortable questions about the ethics of immortal children. If Gregory is mechanical and maintained, he could exist indefinitely as a child-form consciousness, never aging, never developing toward adulthood, trapped in juvenile existence forever. And the theory suggests this eternal childhood could be paradise, infinite play and possibility, or hell, never maturing, never gaining adult agency, perpetually experiencing the world through child's limited perspective. The Gregbot theory, whether true or false, exposes uncomfortable ideas about how far FNAF's universe is willing to go in blurring lines between mechanical and biological, alive and artificial. It presents a vision where grief-driven science creates child simulacra that might or might not be real in meaningful ways, where the attempt to restore a lost child produces something that resembles the original but carries its own existence's dark implications. Whether Gregory is human, haunted animatronic, or advanced AI in child form, the mere possibility of mechanical children with consciousness ventures into territory that makes even FNAF's other horrors seem straightforward by comparison. The loop theory, trapped in endless cycles. Among the various theoretical frameworks the Five Nights at Freddy's community has developed, few are as existentially bleak as the loop theory. This isn't a theory about any single event or character, but rather a meta-narrative interpretation suggesting that key elements of FNAF's story repeat endlessly, characters trapped in cycles they can't escape, souls bound to recreate their traumas indefinitely, timelines potentially looping back on themselves. If these interpretations are correct, FNAF's universe isn't one where suffering eventually ends. It's one where the same horrors repeat eternally. The most direct evidence for looping comes from a FNAF world's clock ending and its connection to other games. In the clock ending, a mysterious entity speaks about setting things right, about having tried multiple times, about persistence despite repeated failures. The theory interprets this as a character, possibly Cassidy or the crying child, attempting to change events through some form of time manipulation or spiritual influence. Each attempt creating a new iteration of the timeline, each failure leading to another loop. Happiest Day, the minigame where the children's spirits finally find peace, contains loop implications. The way the minigame is hidden, requiring specific steps across multiple games, the way it seems to reset if not completed properly, suggests that children have attempted this release multiple times. The theory proposes that the spirits have been trying to free themselves for decades, perhaps centuries of subjective time, each failed attempt resetting them to their trapped state, forcing them to wait for another opportunity. The security puppet's behavior in FNAF 2 might demonstrate looping. It appears in the prize corner, tied to music boxes, seemingly trying to prevent something or reach someone. The theory suggests the puppet might be experiencing repeating events, knowing Charlotte Emily died outside but unable to prevent it, forced to relive the failure to protect her over and over. Each time the music box winds down, each time the puppet emerges, it might be another iteration of trying and failing to change a predetermined outcome. An Ultimate Custom Night's Endless Nights concept extends beyond individual punishment to metaphysical imprisonment. The theory proposes UCN doesn't just trap one character in repeating nights. It might trap the entire FNAF universe in a loop. If Cassidy won't release William, if the vengeance cycle continues indefinitely, then the spiritual realm where these events play out remains locked, unable to move forward, stuck in perpetual reenactment of violence and suffering. The Fazbear Fright's epilogues introduce Eleanor and the concept of agony spreading through objects, creating new horrors from old suffering. The theory suggests this creates self-perpetuating loops, where agony generates entities. Those entities create more agony. That agony infects new objects, in a cycle that never diminishes. The Stitch Wraith's collection of agony-infected items might be an attempt to break this loop, gathering cursed objects to prevent them from spreading suffering, but each collected item could potentially restart the cycle elsewhere. The Ball Pit from Into the Pit, a location that allows time travel or temporal connection between periods, presents the most literal loop mechanism. Someone who enters the pit can witness past events, possibly influence them, but the theory suggests they might become trapped in temporal recursion, experiencing the same moments repeatedly, unable to escape back to their original timeline. The yellow thing that pursues Oswald might itself be caught in a loop, endlessly hunting in a static recreation of 1985. The mimic's nature as learning I introduces conceptual loops. It observes behaviors, replicates them, and those replications create new situations to observe, leading to further replication in an expanding spiral. The theory proposes the mimic might be trapped in a loop of mimicry, unable to stop replicating because its core programming demands continuous observation and reproduction. Every cycle adds to its behavioral library, making it more dangerous, but also more thoroughly trapped in its fundamental nature. The FNAF timeline's confusing chronology, jumping between different eras, revisiting earlier events through later games, might itself reflect looping narrative structure. The theory suggests we're not experiencing a linear story, but rather multiple iterations of similar events, each game showing another version of the cycle. The missing children incident happens, often dies. Spirits seek revenge. Victims find or don't find peace. But the underlying pattern repeats across different manifestations and time frames. The generational trauma aspect creates familial loops. William's obsessions and crimes damage his children. Michael spends his life addressing his father's legacy and his own crime against his brother. Elizabeth dies in William's creation. The crying child suffers from William's negligence. The theory proposes the Afton family is trapped in cycle of trauma, begetting trauma. Each generation's wounds creating circumstances for the next generation's suffering. The corporate loop at Fazbear Entertainment adds institutional recursion. They build restaurants, tragedies occur. They cover up crimes. Public backlash forces closure. They rebrand and build new locations. More tragedies occur. The theory suggests Fazbear Entertainment might be trapped in this pattern, unable or unwilling to break the cycle because the underlying causes, prioritizing profit over safety, refusing to properly address past crimes, remain constant across iterations. The possession mechanics themselves create loops. Spirits possess animatronics. Those possessed machines attack people. New victims potentially become new spirits. Those spirits possess other machines, in a potential cascade where possession spreads rather than diminishes. The theory proposes that without deliberate intervention to free spirits, possession could accumulate, more souls joining the trapped, expanding the cycle rather than resolving it. The memory implications of looping are particularly dark. If characters experience repeating events, do they remember previous iterations? The theory suggests several possibilities. They might retain full memory, unaware they're trapped in cycles, experiencing the horror of knowing they'll repeat these events again, unable to change outcomes. They might lose memory with each reset, experiencing events as fresh each time, trapped in eternal present without historical awareness. Or worst, they might have fragmentary memory, knowing something is wrong, suspecting they've lived this before, but unable to clearly recall or learn from previous iterations. The consciousness degradation from infinite repetition presents existential horror. A spirit experiencing the same trauma thousands of times might fragment, lose coherence, or transform into something no longer recognizably themselves. The theory proposes that some of FNAF's more abstract or chaotic entities might be spirits that have degraded through too many loop iterations, numb their consciousness worn down to base components, no longer capable of human thought or emotion. The Help Wanted and Special Delivery Games meta-narrative about FNAF games existing within FNAF's universe creates a disturbing loop. In-universe, these are VR games and AR experiences created by Fazbear Entertainment to discredit real events. The theory suggests that the game universe's in-universe games might influence actual events, creating feedback loops where fiction and reality blur. Someone playing a VR recreation of haunted animatronics might actually be interacting with the spirits, their gameplay influencing the spiritual realm, which in turn affects future game design. In a loop where the distinction between simulation and reality breaks down, the Glitchtrap virus's ability to spread through digital copies creates exponential loops. One infected game leads to multiple infected users, each potentially becoming vectors for further spread. The theory proposes this digital replication could continue indefinitely. Glitchtrap's consciousness or programming fragmenting across countless systems, each fragment capable of perpetuating the infection, creating a decentralized loop where eliminating individual instances doesn't stop the overall pattern. The storytelling structure of FNAF itself might be perpetuating loops. Each new game revisits and recontextualizes earlier events. Each book series provides alternate versions of similar stories. The theory suggests Scott Cawthon might have intentionally structured the narrative as looping, and where definitive endings are impossible because the fundamental premises, grief, violence, attempts to undo death, keep reasserting themselves regardless of how many times specific characters find peace. The philosophical implications extend to questions about free will and determinism. If characters are trapped in loops, repeating events unable to change outcomes, do they have agency? The theory proposes FNAF's universe might be fundamentally deterministic, where despite characters' struggles and choices, certain patterns must repeat. William will always seek immortality. Children will always die. Spirits will always seek revenge. The cycle continues because the universe's rules or structure demand these repetitions. The dark absurdism of eternal loops without resolution transforms FNAF's horror from frightening to bleakly comic. The theory suggests that at some level, the franchise's endless expansion of lore, the constant additions and revelations that never quite conclude the story, mirror the in-universe impossibility of true endings. Just as we keep getting new games and books that extend the narrative, characters within might be trapped in similarly endless extensions of their suffering. The possibility that some characters recognize the loops but can't escape them creates tragic awareness. Imagine knowing you're trapped in cycles, remembering previous iterations, understanding the pattern but remaining powerless to break it. The theory proposes certain entities, perhaps the puppet or Cassidy, might have this awareness, might be consciously trying to break loops through various means, i.e. each attempt another iteration in the larger pattern they're trying to escape. The children's spirits achieving happiest day might not end their loop, but simply transition them to a different cycle. The theory occasionally speculates that even the peaceful afterlife ending might not be final, that spirits could be reborn into new suffering, or that the peace is temporary, eventually disturbed by new events that pull them back into active existence. This creates a vision of afterlife as unstable, where even achieved rest can be disrupted, leaving no truly safe conclusion. The loop theory doesn't just make FNAF's events darker through repetition. It transforms the entire narrative into something approaching cosmic horror, where the real monster isn't William Afton or possessed animatronics, but the structure of existence itself. A universe that demands certain patterns repeat endlessly regardless of individual suffering, where escape is impossible because the exits themselves loop back to the beginning, where the only certainty is that the cycle continues, has always continued, will always continue, without hope of final resolution or peace. Hidden implications. What we don't discuss beneath Five Nights at Freddy's surface. Theories beyond the documented tragedies and confirmed horrors lie implications the community rarely addresses directly. These are the uncomfortable logical conclusions that emerge when you examine the evidence too closely, the things we acknowledge through silence or indirect reference, because stating them explicitly feels too dark or too real. Yet these unspoken implications might be the darkest elements in the entire franchise. The physical reality of bodies stuffed in animatronic suits deserves attention we typically avoid. We say the children were stuffed into suits and move on, but consider the mechanics. These are small bodies being forced into mechanical shells with endoskeletons, spring lock mechanisms, wiring, and limited open space. The process would require breaking bones to make bodies fit, compressing corpses into contorted positions, possibly dismembering to solve spatial problems. The theory suggests whoever performed this, probably William Afton, spent hours physically manipulating dead children's bodies into mechanical suits, dealing directly with the reality of corpses, overcoming any squeamishness or moral hesitation to complete the task. The smell and decay complaints from phone calls reference biological reality we don't linger on, and these suits contain decomposing bodies while continuing to perform for children. The pizza restaurant smelled like death, literally, and still operated. The theory proposes employees and customers experience the odor of rotting children for months or years, while Fazbear Entertainment did nothing or actively covered it up, maybe using air fresheners or claiming the smell came from sanitation issues. Parents brought children to celebrate birthdays in rooms that smelled like decay because the missing children's corpses were actively decomposing in the performing animatronics. The trauma for workers discovering bodies during maintenance or cleaning needs consideration. Imagine being a technician tasked with repairing Freddy, opening the chest cavity, and finding a child's decomposed remains. The theory suggests multiple Fazbear Entertainment employees might have encountered bodies, been sworn to silence through threats or NDAs, possibly paid off or relocated. Some workers might have developed PTSD from discoveries they were forced to stay quiet about, carrying knowledge of child murder without ability to report it, without facing legal or professional consequences. The parents of missing children experience ongoing torture that theories rarely address. Their children disappeared at a family restaurant. Bodies never found. No resolution or closure. The theory suggests these parents spend years, possibly decades, wondering if their child was alive somewhere, taken by someone who might still be hurting them, unable to grieve properly because hope for return never fully died. Some parents might still be alive, elderly now, never knowing their child's body was in the building the whole time, eventually incinerated or destroyed when the location closed. The other children who attended the pizzeria around the time of murders, who maybe were friends with the victims, who possibly were at the same party or witnessed the luring, carry trauma the games never address. The theory proposes dozens or hundreds of children might have been psychologically affected by the missing children's incident, experiencing survivors' guilt if they escaped similar luring attempts, developing fears and anxieties about public spaces or strangers in costumes, growing up with the knowledge that somewhere near them, other children were murdered and no one was held accountable. The sexual abuse implications in William Afton's crimes against children represent the darkest unspoken territory. The games never explicitly address this, and the community mostly avoids speculation. But the reality of child predators, the typical patterns of abduction and murder, the private spaces and broken trust involved, all raise questions about whether William's crimes included elements beyond murder. The theory, uncomfortable as it is to consider, acknowledges that realistic child predator behavior includes sexual components, and while nothing in FNAF confirms this, nothing explicitly denies it either. The psychological torture of the crying child before his death involved sustained abuse that shaped his entire short life. The theory suggests he probably suffered anxiety disorders, might have developed PTSD from constant fear, or possibly experienced depression or suicidal ideation from the unrelenting nature of his trauma. His brother and father created an environment where this child couldn't feel safe anywhere, couldn't trust his own family, lived in constant state of hypervigilance and fear. The mental health impact of this level of sustained childhood trauma would be profound. The economic and social fallout from Fazbear Entertainment's crimes affected entire communities that theories rarely explore. Multiple restaurant locations closed after incidents, meaning job losses, failed businesses, neighborhoods economically impacted by closures. The theory suggests families dependent on Fazbear Entertainment employment might have been thrown into financial hardship when locations shut down. Local communities associated with child murders might have faced stigma or economic decline from the area being linked to tragedy. The copycat potential of publicized animatronic murders might inspire similar crimes in-universe. If someone learned that children could be murdered and hidden in animatronic suits, that this method had worked for years before discovery, the theory acknowledges the possibility of other predators adopting similar techniques at non-Fazbear locations. The franchise focuses on one company's crimes, but the methods could spread, creating cascading horror we never witnessed directly. The living conditions of spirits trapped in animatronics include sensory deprivation and distortion we avoid addressing. These children exist without ability to see normally, hear clearly, or feel temperature or tactile sensations in human ways. The theory suggests they might be blind in traditional sense, experiencing only what the animatronics' crude sensors provide, hearing through filtering of mechanical audio systems, existing in constant sensory confusion where input doesn't match remembered human experience. This disorientation continuing for years might be worse than more dramatic tortures. The workers at Sister Location, who were killed by the Funtime animatronics, probably died in the same child capture mechanisms William designed for abduction. The theory, connecting various clues, suggests adult employees might have been grabbed by the same claws, stored in the same tanks, experiencing the same deaths William intended for children, and the irony of adults dying in child murder machines might have pleased William as brutal efficiency or appealed to his dark sense of cosmic justice. The possibility that William often felt sexual attraction to death itself, becoming aroused by his acts of murder, represents speculation too dark for most discussions, but potentially supported by psychological profiles of real serial killers. The theory, uncomfortable as it is, acknowledges that William's repeated child murders, his preservation of bodies, his possible collection of remains or souvenirs, his return to sites and victims, all match patterns of killers who derive sexual satisfaction from death and decay. The remnant harvesting process, if it requires dying victims to experience maximum fear, might mean William kept some victims alive during the stuffing process. For the theory occasionally surfaces that children might have been placed into suits while still breathing, experiencing the horror of being trapped in mechanical shells while dying slowly from injuries or suffocation, their extended suffering producing more potent remnant. This transforms quick murders into prolonged torture. The economic exploitation of haunted animatronics, if Fazbear Entertainment knowingly used possessed machines because they perform better, represents corporate evil using trapped souls as free labor. The theory suggests the company might have recognized that possessed animatronics moved more naturally, required less maintenance, created more engaging performances, and deliberately chose to utilize child spirits as unpaid workers, powering their entertainment empire. The medical professionals who treated the crying child after the bite of 83, who kept him alive on machines for days, might have known the case was futile, but continued treatment because the family could pay, or because protocol demanded it. The theory suggests this child suffered in hospital limbo, machines breathing for him, pain medications possibly insufficient, all so doctors could follow procedures or extract maximum payment before inevitable death. The first responders who arrived at scenes of child disappearances, who searched for missing victims, who probably suspected foul play but couldn't prove it, carry secondary trauma we ignore. The theory acknowledges that police, EMTs, and investigators exposed to child death cases often develop PTSD, addiction, or other mental health issues. Multiple professional adults might have been permanently damaged by investigating Fazbear's crimes without being able to solve or prevent them. The possibility that some missing children weren't killed immediately, that William might have held victims for periods before murder, introduces kidnapping and imprisonment into his crimes. The theory occasionally speculates about whether children might have been kept in the underground facilities, subjected to experimentation or abuse before death, experiencing days or weeks of terror before their ultimate fate. The normalization of horror for children growing up around Fazbear Entertainment deserves consideration. Kids who regularly visited these restaurants, who heard rumors about missing children, who saw aggressive animatronic behavior, might have internalized the idea that this level of danger was normal for childhood entertainment. The theory suggests an entire generation of children might have been desensitized to warning signs or trained to dismiss their instincts about unsafe situations. These unspoken implications, the things we acknowledge obliquely but rarely address directly, represent the most disturbing elements of Five Nights at Freddy's, not because they're supernatural, but because they're realistic extensions of the franchise's established horrors. The games give us haunted animatronics and possession. The theories explore these concepts' logical conclusions. But the truly dark material lives in the spaces we don't theorize about. The implications too uncomfortable to make explicit. The realistic horrors that would accompany fictional tragedies if they occurred in our world. Conclusion. The allure of darkness. We've descended through layers of Five Nights at Freddy's darkest theories, examining interpretations of William Afton's possible motivations around remnant harvesting, the disturbing implications of what the missing children may have experienced, the crying child's family trauma, theories about consciousness trapped in remnant and agony, the mimic's evolution from grief tool to threat, Gregory's debated connection to Patient 46, interpretations of Ultimate Custom Night as eternal torment, the controversial Gregbot theory, loop theories suggesting characters might be trapped in cycles, and logical extensions of events we typically avoid confronting directly. It's crucial to remember that these are theories, are interpretations built from evidence scattered throughout games, books, and hidden details. Some have strong support from multiple sources. Others exist in more speculative territory, where the evidence suggests possibilities without confirming them. The community continues debating which interpretations best fit the available information, and new releases regularly shift our understanding, as Scott Cawthon and Steel Wool add new pieces to this complex puzzle. Each theory reveals something different about the franchise's depths. William Afton's systematic approach transforms him from random killer into methodical monster. The missing children's extended suffering shows how death can be insufficient end when consciousness persists in agony. The crying child's story exposes family dysfunction as fundamental horror. Remnant and agony provide pseudo-scientific framework for weaponized suffering. The mimic demonstrates how trauma and neglect birth monsters from innocent origins. Gregory's mysteries suggest the lines between victim and threat, human and mechanical, can blur beyond recognition. Ultimate Custom Night proposes eternal punishment as cosmic possibility. Loop theories suggest escape might be structurally impossible. and the unspoken implications remind us that fictional horror often mirrors real darkness. What makes these theories endure isn't just their darkness, but how they illuminate Five Nights at Freddy's core appeal. Scott Cawthon created a franchise that rewards close examination, that hides disturbing implications beneath simple presentation, that trusts its audience to confront uncomfortable ideas without explicit guidance. The theories exist because the games provide space for them, evidence that can be assembled into nightmarish scenarios, room for speculation that ventures into genuine darkness. Why do we theorize about these things? Why does the community spend hours analyzing the mechanics of remnant harvesting or debating whether Gregory is human? Part of it is puzzle-solving satisfaction, assembling scattered clues into coherent narratives. Part is community engagement, sharing ideas and building collective understanding. But there's something deeper. These theories let us explore darkness safely, to examine horror through fictional lens, to confront the reality of what cruelty looks like when pursued with intelligence and method. The darkness in FNAF theories serves cathartic purpose. By examining William Afton's calculated evil, we process real-world predators' methodical approaches. By exploring children's suffering in possession, we acknowledge that trauma persists beyond immediate events. By considering loops and eternal torment, we wrestle with questions about justice, mercy, and suffering that have no easy answers. The theories give us framework for thinking about darkness that extends beyond jump scares into genuine contemplation of human capacity for cruelty and suffering's nature. The community's willingness to engage with these dark theories demonstrates FNAF's successful appeal to audiences seeking more than surface horror. We're not just here for animatronics and night shift survival. We're here for the implications, for the disturbing questions about consciousness and death, and what people become when grief or ambition override morality. The theories prove that horror can be intellectually engaging, that fictional darkness can illuminate real concerns, that examining the worst possible scenarios helps us understand the world's actual threats. As new games and books continue expanding FNAF's universe, new theories will emerge, new dark corners will be discovered. The upcoming titles might confirm some theories while disproving others. But the community's engagement with darkness, the willingness to examine disturbing implications, the careful analysis of how suffering works in this fictional universe will continue. Because ultimately, that's what makes Five Nights at Freddy's special. It's horror that respects its audience enough to let them find the darkness themselves. Before we end this exploration, I might want to encourage you to like and subscribe if you found value in this deep examination of FNAF's darkest theories. Let me know in the comments which theory disturbed you most, whether you think any of these will be confirmed in future releases, or if there are other dark corners of the lore you think deserve this kind of attention. Share where you're listening from and how these theories have changed or deepened your understanding of the franchise. Thank you for descending into this darkness with me. Whether you're drifting toward sleep surrounded by these disturbing ideas, fully awake and contemplating the implications, or somewhere in between, I hope this exploration has illuminated something about why Five Nights at Freddy's continues to captivate us over a decade after that first game. The darkness isn't just decoration, and it's essential to what makes this franchise meaningful, what transforms it from simple horror game into something that generates endless discussion and theory. The theories we've examined tonight represent years of community effort, countless hours of analysis, passionate debate, and careful evidence assembly. They show us what Scott Cawthon and later developers created, not just in intentional storytelling, but in spaces left for interpretation. The darkest theories exist because the games allow them, because the evidence supports disturbing conclusions, because the franchise trusts us to handle complicated, unsettling ideas. As you continue your own journey through Five Nights at Freddy's lore, remember that darkness serves purpose. It challenges us to think deeply about the nature of evil, the persistence of suffering, and the possibility of redemption or its absence. It asks whether eternal punishment is ever justified, whether children can be complicit in darkness when manipulated by adults or entities, whether consciousness trapped in mechanical shells experiences anything we'd recognize as existence. These aren't just fictional questions. They're philosophical inquiries dressed in animatronic costumes. Sweet dreams, theorists. May your own speculations about the darkest corners of this franchise lead you to understanding, whether that understanding brings comfort or continues the unsettling feeling these theories evoke. The darkness in FNAF reflects the darkness we're all capable of recognizing in our world. Examining it through fictional lens doesn't make it less real, but it does make it more manageable, more discussable, and more something we can confront together rather than facing alone in quiet horror. The story continues, the theories evolve, the darkness persists, and we keep returning to these questions, these disturbing scenarios, these uncomfortable implications, because somewhere in examining them, we find meaning. Not answers necessarily, but meaning. And perhaps that's enough. In reflecting on these theories, it's worth considering what they reveal about our relationship with horror as a genre and as a cultural phenomenon. Five Nights at Freddy's succeeded, not despite its darkness, but because of it, because it offered horror that respected intelligence, while embracing disturbing concepts that most family entertainment would avoid. The theories we've explored tonight exist in that space between childhood innocence and adult awareness, where we recognize that terrible things happen to children, that evil can be methodical rather than chaotic, that suffering doesn't always lead to resolution or justice. The community that builds these theories, that spends hours debating remnant mechanics or possession logistics, demonstrates something profound about human nature. We're drawn to darkness not because we're broken, but because examining horror helps us process reality. Every theory about William Afton's experiments echoes real predators' calculated approaches. Every exploration of children's suffering acknowledges that trauma has lasting effects. Every debate about eternal punishment wrestles with questions about justice that our justice systems struggle to answer. The darkest theories serve as safe containers for unsafe thoughts. They let us explore what happens when grief overrides morality, when intelligence serves cruelty, when systems fail to protect the vulnerable, when suffering extends beyond death. These aren't comfortable topics for casual conversation, but wrapped in fictional frameworks, dressed in animatronic costumes and supernatural mechanics, they become discussable. We can examine William Afton's methodology without defending real predators. We can explore remnant harvesting without minimizing real trauma. The fiction provides necessary distance, while the darkness remains meaningfully engaged. Looking forward, as Five Nights at Freddy's continues expanding through new games, books, and media, the theories will evolve. Some will be confirmed, transforming from speculation to canon. Others will be disproven, are relegated to interesting but incorrect interpretations. New evidence will emerge demanding new theories, possibly darker than what we've imagined so far. The franchise shows no signs of simplifying or pulling back from disturbing implications, which suggests future content will continue providing material for these dark explorations. What remains constant is the community's engagement, the willingness to examine horror closely, to follow implications to their conclusions, to build collective understanding of fictional darkness that illuminates real concerns. The theories we've discussed tonight represent not just individual speculation, but collaborative effort, years of discussion and debate that refined rough ideas into comprehensive interpretations. This collaborative darkness, if you will, demonstrates how horror can build community rather than isolate, how shared exploration of disturbing ideas creates connection rather than division. The meta-textual elements of theorizing about darkness deserve acknowledgement too. By spending hours analyzing the mechanics of children's suffering in fictional contexts, we're performing a kind of cultural ritual, processing anxieties about child safety, death, consciousness, and evil through controlled examination. The theories serve therapeutic functions even as they disturb, letting us confront fears in manageable doses, building familiarity with worst-case scenarios that makes real-world threats feel slightly less overwhelming. So as you move forward from this exploration, whether immediately or after sleep, has processed these ideas into dream logic, carry with you the recognition that darkness serves purpose. The theories aren't just morbid curiosity or shock value. They're earnest attempts to understand what Scott Cawthon and his team created, to extract meaning from horror, to recognize patterns in chaos. They represent the best of what fan communities can accomplish when they take fictional worlds seriously enough to examine their darkest corners with rigor and care. Thank you again for joining this descent into 5 Nights at Freddy's most disturbing theories. Your engagement with this content, whether you agree or disagree with specific interpretations, whether these ideas comfort or disturb you, contributes to the larger conversation that keeps this franchise vital and meaningful. The darkness we've explored tonight exists because you and thousands of others care enough to look closely at horror, to ask difficult questions, to build theories that respect both the franchise's complexity and its willingness to venture into genuinely dark territory. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, stay willing to examine darkness when it reveals truth, and remember that the best horror doesn't just scare us, it makes us think, makes us question, makes us confront ideas we'd rather avoid. 5 Nights at Freddy's has given us that gift repeatedly over the past decade, and these theories represent our gift back to the franchise, taking its darkness seriously, exploring its implications thoroughly, and finding meaning in the shadows between the jump scares.